Hello, welcome everybody. This is Mark from the Colonomic Action Team, and I'm welcoming you to our weekly webinar session with Dr. Wayne Durbin. And Wayne looks like he might be busy, or maybe he'll be coming in a little late. Let's see if he joins. But hey, how are you all doing? Thank you for joining our weekly webinar. We'll give it just a couple of minutes before we get started. So type in where you at in the world, how is the weather, and let's see. We'll, well, when doesn't make it tonight, we can watch a replay of our previous webinars, or I've got a real good one. You'll really enjoy this one. So stick around for a little bit. And once again, thank you for thanks to our audience who are here for joining. This is our weekly talk with Wayne, and uh, we bring you some of the greatest speakers from around the world, um, experts in several fields like agriculture, economics, anything that's economic, basically. So in a few minutes, we'll start our webinar, but in a little bit, uh, we'll just wait a little bit to see if Dr. Wayne Dorvan joins us. And if he doesn't join us, then we'll show a replay of Mark Shepard, Forest Ecology. So give us a couple of more minutes. Alicia Rose says, peace be with you. Thank you, Alicia, for your comment. Thank you for being in the audience. And we'll just give it a few minutes, and then we'll start a replay. And everybody who's here, type in where you at. And let's see. So far, I've got Alicia. Mm, but anyhow, we'll get started with our webinar. We'll do a replay today. Looks like Dr. Durban is not available tonight. So let's get started with I'll get started with a replay. This is really nice. You're going to enjoy this. And in a moment, I'll get that going. All right. So let me know. Can everybody see that? Type in a one if you can see the slide on your screen. And in a moment, you'll hear the audio. So this is Mark Shepard's Forest Ecology.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our 11th, where's my webcam now? 11th of our sessions on forest ecology with Mark Shepard. And if you haven't been here before, you're going to love this. This is going to be fun. You definitely want to go back and listen to replays. Mark has been with us and talked about things all over the world, but he's talked to us from Africa. He's talked to us from airports. He's talked to us from you name it. I've been in a McDonald's parking lot in 100-degree weather in Southern California. I've been in Yuma, Arizona at 120. We've done it from everywhere. We've got it, man. If you didn't hear, we're actually under a little bit of a fire warning right now. We have a forest fire that's burning about half a mile from us, and it's going the other way, but we may get evacuated. This is Mark's show tonight anyway, so I'm not going to do anything other than just make this introduction. Quickly say, if you haven't done it yet, again, go into the replays, which are on the Economic Action Team site, and that is, I won't give the URL, I'll give it, but it's at ceed.mykajabi.com. And you, if you aren't already opted in and you're registered for this, you will be. I will make you a member if you haven't, if you're here for the first time. Most of you have been here before, so you already are members. And I'm going to stop with that and turn it over to Mark.
Okay, hey, welcome everybody. Like Wayne said, is we're involved here in a exposition of the basic forest ecology curriculum. I just unplugged my computer. And I really do encourage you guys to go back and look at all of the, if you haven't gone through all of them, to at least sit through them again, because they're cumulative. What we talk about in each session is going to depend on what we learned in the previous session. And tonight, we're continuing. This is phase 3 of disturbance, how ecosystems change through time as they're growing and changing. Something happens to cause an issue in that system, that's the disturbance. That's how we want to view managing our land as restoration agriculture, farmers and ranchers. And now why isn't my, there we go. Of course, once again, I got my original inspiration from J. Russell Smith, Tree Crops, a Permanent Agriculture. I've been interested in developing a permanent agriculture ever since I was in high school, believe it or not. Ran into the word permaculture, to the book Permaculture, and was trained in permaculture back in the early 90s. Eventually got my diploma from Bill Mollison himself. The phrase, though, that changed my life and really got my thinking totally different is this, that with permaculture, our aim is to design systems that are ecologically sound and economically profitable. And from my perspective, there really is no other thing that we need to work on. Because if we create a system that's ecologically sound and economically profitable, now we have time to deal with social issues and, you know, who lives where and all kinds of different other things. But if we don't have ecological systems that feed us and provide us with the goods that we need in order to get by, then what's the point? So my aim is to create systems that are ecologically sound and economically profitable. And there we go. Of course, David Holmgren reconfigured a lot of Bill Mollison's. They used to be called Mollisonisms, which are the permaculture principles. And where we are firmly rooted right now is observe, imitate, and interact. This is number one. Both Holmgren and Mollison talk about it. I stress it over and over and over again. We need to observe nature, imitate the systems, then interact with that. If we aren't observing nature, we miss the whole point. I just got a lengthy email from a person this morning talking about all sorts of different guild creation systems and protocols, and he's learned from this person and that person and this person and that person, and you know, there's no numbers on it and all that kind of stuff. We don't have to invent guilds. However nature got here, all the answers are for us already, but we have to understand, how do we observe nature? How does it work? And then once we understand what it is and how it works, then we can imitate that. And in order to observe and interact, we have to know the difference between an observation and a concept. Observation is something we see, hear, taste, touch, smell, measure with instruments. And if I give you a list that says how to observe this phenomena, you will observe the same phenomena as I do. You may call it something totally different than I do with a different name, but we observe the same phenomena. We'll talk about this later on. Remind me when we get to stump sprouts to talk about this again, the difference between an observation and a concept. Wrote a book, Restoration Agriculture. Buy it if you haven't. Read it. Super simple. It's actually, it was just last week I found out that it's now being translated into Spanish, which I suspect is going to be even bigger seller than in the English, because there are more people involved in agriculture who speak Spanish, whether it's in North America, Central, South America, Europe, A lot of folks speak Spanish, more than English when it comes to agriculture. Forest ecology, the scientific study, repeatable, observable study of interrelated patterns, processes, flora and fauna of systems that include perennial woody plants. It doesn't always have to be a closed canopy woods that many of you are familiar with, especially our Vermonter there. These open grasslands with trees, savannas, these all qualify. Basic rules of ecology apply whether there are trees there or not. It's just that we're talking about systems that include trees. And just because a forest isn't there now doesn't mean it doesn't function according to ecological principles. This grassland, rolling hills right here, is in a phase of site development. We've done a little bit, touched a little bit on succession. We're going to touch a little bit more on succession. This once upon a time may have been, looks to me like there's a lot of blowing sand dunes. It could have been drift at the end of a glacier. It could have been next to a lake or an ocean for eons, and now that sand dunes have developed. Or it could be a former desert area that's become moist, and now it's developing into a grassland, eventually becoming forested. And of course, the type of forest, the shape of the forest, the physiognomy of the forest itself is going to look different, whether you're in the tropics, the Arctic, subarctic, whether it's a dry site, a humid site, etc. Now, ecosystem change, short-term ecosystem change happens in your lifetime, in my lifetime. What we do when we're on the ground, planting trees, doing water management structures, building buildings, all of this is the succession of the site. And this is just some successional shots of my place. This is 20 years ago in southwest Wisconsin. Maybe a year or two after that, we can see some, where are they? That's not one, that's a mullein. I thought there were some trees in the foreground here. Alternating strips in between these strips. So there's a small grains, alley of small grains, alley of produce, alley of small grains, alley of produce. In between, there's chestnuts. This ridge right there, we call that the South Ridge. That has a young chestnut forest on it right now. This was 2003, I believe it was. You can see how the site has developed a little more. You see all the different lines for the water management strategy. If we were, that last shot was looking across at this ridge, the alternating strips of grains and produce going down that ridge. A few more years go by, you can see the young chestnut trees growing. That's the same ridge here. These are successional changes until now. Here it's all grown together and you can almost hardly see the rows sometimes. This was just taken 2 years ago, actually. Successional change. And managing that succession of the system, let's see if I can go back. Yes, I can. This right here, it's going to continue to grow. All these trees are going to grow. They're the locally adapted, mostly the oak savanna and northern hardwoods plant communities that we've planted here. They will eventually, with enough moisture and no disturbance, grow into a closed canopy forest with very little vegetation underneath, a thick duff layer, spring-grown ephemerals, lots of decay and the fungus. This will eventually grow to a closed canopy forest, or if I continue to manage succession, I can keep it in a phase, an ecological phase, also known as a SEER. I can keep it in that phase that's most advantageous to what I want to do on my particular property. And we do that through disturbance. We farm the successional process. We use the species, and we know that this process is going to take place. We're going to go from bare soil of a cornfield through the lichen and moss phase, grasses, herbs, and shrubs, whatever the species are of your place. This is actually quite similar to what could be occurring in Vermont. I fixated on Vermont because I missed the North Woods right now, and I saw that someone was from Vermont. So we interact with our site, and we affect the successional process on our place with disturbance. And all through the eons, plants have moved across this continent in response to weather changes, glaciation changes, volcanic changes, river pattern changes. All of these species have migrated across the continent based on the disturbance. And ecologists define disturbance any kind of discrete event that changes the ecosystem, the structure, that's its shape, all the configuration, whether it's an open canopy, closed canopy, species composition, new species come in, old species get burned out or blown out or eventually become extinct for whatever reason. And it changes their functioning. Obviously, different species and different planting configurations will affect their functioning. We want to understand how the structure, species composition, and the function of our system works. And so we need to understand how disturbance interacts with our particular species suite and the disturbance regime that we use to manage our system. Disturbance includes landslides, major ecosystem components on the shape, from the shape of the land, volcanism. Some disturbance events are repeated on a short cycle, once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, once a decade, once every 50 years, or as in this case right here, once every 10,000 years or so, your mountain blows up, and then succession starts all over again. That's a pretty serious disturbance if you happen to have been living there. Disturbance includes soil erosion, flood, debris that's blown, banking collapse, and it disrupts the existing vegetation. This little place right here looks like it could be New Hampshire. There'd be more people living there if it was Vermont. Disturbance somehow disrupts this, and there's a whole host of different things that could disturb it, from wind to insects to disease, pest outbreak. When it kills organisms within the system, if we need to understand how the systems recover in order for us to learn how to interact with our own farm and ranch. If we know how our property or our suite of species are going to behave if they're trampled, then we know how to manage our animals in order to accomplish objectives. We can use animals as a management tool or our equipment as a management tool, and so on. We need to observe nature, how it works, understand these different disturbance regimes and recovery regimes in order to manage our property. I already mentioned the different scales from continent-wide to, single tree gets blown down. It can be from very infrequent, like tens of thousands, millions of years, to every single year. Disturbance affects the site by creating new landforms. It rearranges the parent material of the soil, changes the soil properties. It changes the light and the temperature regime. And all of that affects the biota on our site. Now just think of all those different things I said: the shape of the land, rearranging the parent material, somehow changing the soil property, maybe by the addition of new mineral elements that came down in a flood, deposition of sand dunes and so on, different light configurations, different temperature regimes, all those different things. We can affect our site and affect all those little things, and when we, or one at a time, when we affect one of those things, how's our system going to respond? Knowing these things will help us to do our work as a farmer rancher far more efficiently and effectively. So much so that the closer we get to imitating a natural system, the less actual labor time and the less expense is involved in managing our system. But we have to understand how that system works in order to nudge it through time using disturbance. Here's a case in point right here. These were, you saw these a couple weeks ago, high-density chestnut trees that have closed the canopy now. With a closed canopy, the crown of the tree is getting restricted. They're not producing as many nuts per plant. The sun is starting to not strike the forest floor, and so we're not getting grasses. They're getting replaced by more shade-tolerant plants. Well, if I want grasses so I can have grazing animals in there, and if I want to have more chestnuts on my trees, I need to somehow disturb this site. And so perhaps I come in through and I act like a windstorm, poof, and I blow down 50% of the canopy trees and lay them flat on the ground. This is exactly what happened here. These are all mostly black locust. There's quite a few sugar maple that were in there, some American hop hornbeam, black cherry. I just chop and drop, leave them on the ground. Leafed them left them on the ground. Of course, exclusion of disturbance is its own kind of disturbance, and the classic is with the redwoods in the West Coast. And actually much of the Rocky Mountains and western USA has had 60 to 80 years of intentional fire exclusion, which really has caused as many problems as it solved. Once upon a time, people thought, it's like, wow, gee, all these fires are ruining the trees. We need more trees to grow. It's good to let the trees grow. So you have these nice parklands, whether it's redwood parklands or ponderosa pine parklands in Colorado. Then they all grow up with these younger trees, and as we'll talk later on, many of the trees that come up underneath are not fire tolerant. And that's kind of on purpose, because then they'll just burn out again. Well, the taller you let these trees go, the more danger there is to the large trees. And once these are big enough, you could light these on fire and kill every single redwood. Whereas in this open parkland, these young little trees will sprout up underneath, fire comes through, and it keeps it as a grassy savanna, redwood savanna. And of course, disturbances don't necessarily happen just one at a time, and their effects may be cumulative, their effects may be cyclical. Ice damage, for example, can break branches. It provides an infection site for disease, which weakens the tree, which becomes susceptible to insect attack, and then the affected tree doesn't survive a drought, which kills the tree. Well, which disturbance actually killed the tree? All of these things work together, and for us to understand that it's not the most obvious thing, it's not the bark beetle that wiped out these sections of forest. The bark beetle is one piece in a big, huge cyclical cycle of cycles. We need to understand them. Most plant communities don't start completely from scratch. Our surviving organisms are the biological legacies. No matter where you live, there are biological legacies right now that will be providing a certain amount of biotic inertia to change away from what that system is. Whether you're in Vermont or Kansas or Missouri or Texas, the trees and shrubs and bushes and grasses around you, they're sending seed in. There's pests and diseases that are associated with those plant communities. And if you try to establish a new type of system altogether, you're going to be taken over with all the natural things that are coming in, invading your beautiful little system. So understand the importance of biological legacies and try to work with them instead of fighting against them. Remember, human disturbances are still disturbances. They may be a lot more damaging, but they are just merely disturbances. They'll only be here for a short, couple thousand, or in the case of the Hanford facility, nuclear waste, maybe a million or so years, no problem when it comes to a planet. It's kind of a problem when it comes to us. And you can see here, even on this mining site, there's still legacies around here to reseed this. As soon as the people are gone, the process is going to start. Succession is going to start over and clothe that site with trees. Some of the physical legacies left behind are bare soil, for example, or rearranged mineral soil, new microtopography as a result of uprooting, debris flows, and so on. So legacies, whether they're biological legacies or physical legacies, these are what set up our next successional direction forward. So the pictures I showed earlier of the chestnuts that were too thin, I've thinned out some of the chestnuts, removed a whole bunch of locusts. The legacies are the chestnuts left behind. And of course, the grazing animals that I'm going to bring through there and the grasses that remain there, they're going to drive the next wave of succession forward. So we can at least plan, years, decades, even centuries ahead. I have a part of my farm that I planted probably 15 or 16 years ago, knowing that probably between their mid-20s and mid-30s, might decide to build a home, and they might need lumber to build a home. So we've got land that would be paid for, and we've got the material to build a home out of. It's all right there. We're planning ahead and understand how to manage that site with the type of disturbance that we introduce to it. All right, so wind has an effect on the macro and the micro physiography. These are the Warren Dunes in Michigan. This sand, some of the biggest sand dune piles I've ever seen. Is quite amazing. Obviously, if you're buried by a sand dune, that's a disturbance to you and your local system, but new successional pathways happen. New process. And I showed this a couple weeks ago when we were up in Minnesota. It's not all that easy to see, but all along this ridge, wherever we see the white sticks, it was quite a significant blowdown up in the Boundary Waters a few weeks ago, and we went up to film it. Like hundreds of square miles of trees just snapped off. Obviously, this has rearranged the structure of the ecosystem. Different plants are left behind to survive. One of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit, there's a permaculture teacher online who made not a mistake, he just invoked my name as support for an argument that he was making. Well, unfortunately, he was arguing against observable phenomena, and he was talking about soil development, and it's taught quite widely that you never, 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 never disturb the soil, because that's what ruins the soil. You have to leave the soil undisturbed and somehow figure out how to plant into that, use mulches, sheet mulch, lasagna gardening, all that kind of whatever. And then there's a lot of people also that whine that swales and berms are not, are not necessary or even important. Well, a couple of things right here. When a tree blows down, root plate rips up and tree falls over. The root has its own organic matter, the duff on the top, plus mineral soil, rocks and chunks that are in it, and it slowly decomposes over time, and you end up with a pit. It's like our swale, and then our berm. So what happens is we've ripped up this root system. We've exposed the mineral soil in the pit. This is new planting sites. New plants can get established here. New organic matter can accumulate. This is creating better soil using disturbance. Well, then this mound, this is now a mix of rocks and debris. We'll show some pictures in the next couple of slides. You've mixed these rocks, which were below the level of where they would be acted on by oxygen or rain or freezing. So when you uproot the tree, all these rocks and the soil particles now get mixed thoroughly with this organic matter and actually can accelerate the production of a rich, thick, diverse topsoil. So what I wanted to point out in that particular case right there is to observe phenomena. Let's observe nature. What is nature doing when it is doing this? What's happening here when we have a depression that now can collect this organic matter that decomposes, that can have a little bit more moisture in it, and so these little tree seedlings can get established? Seems to me that this little depression in this particular case, in this context, with these species, helped these trees to get established. Well, now we see that the mineral soil got thoroughly mixed with organic matter, and it's going to slowly decompose in a pile. So we have an example here of what happens. I'm not saying this is good or bad or right or wrong. This is an observable phenomena that right here, this is going to be a richer, more fertile soil in another 5-10 years as all the organic matter decomposes. There's more air in here for aerobic bacteria and fungi, obviously a lot of fungi in the roots, and these pieces of rock and the small chunks of gravel are all exposed to the oxygen. They're going to start to oxidize. The acids in the rain, humic acids, are going to start to dissolve the minerals in it. This type of disturbance actually over time will create a richer soil. Here's those little trees getting established. And I already mentioned all this. As the roots decompose, organic matter and minerals become mixed, and so on. And the decaying tree is some of my favorites right here. Now, gaps created by this disturbance allow extra light to come in and extra rainfall. So now it's enough for these species that have to have sun, allows them to grow a little bit faster here. Doesn't matter necessarily what opened up that canopy. We just understand how opening the canopy will affect this little group of trees here. Now we're getting to the exciting part. The wind, of course, tends to remove the overstory trees. A lot will ring off. They'll snap up the top. A lot will fall over, whereas fire tends to remove the understory. Of course, when the fire climbs all the way through the trees and crowns out, that also will remove overstory. But those actually are the exception. They're not as common. So there we go, fire. How's the fire coming along? Wayne, update? He's not listening. So fire worldwide has been observed to be the dominant disturbance factor in landscape history worldwide. Every climate, even in the tropical rainforests, even swamps will experience fires. This is a place where I took a picture of this is 1 year after a burn up near Ely, Minnesota, west of Ely, Minnesota. And notice that a brushy layer has been removed. The taller trees that have to have a little thick, they managed to survive. Or if they had shed their branches real early, like these pines, one of the fire strategies is when they shed their branches young, they fall to the ground. There's no what they call ladder fuels that allows the fire to climb up like that, climb up to the top of the crown of the trees. It just burns on the ground. Part of what's significant about fire is it doesn't just wipe out massive acreages uniformly. Even if it covers, 1,000 acres, for example, the whole 1,000 acres got burned somehow. different parts of that 1,000 acres got burned with different intensities. And it's a heterogeneous effect in that you're going to have these random patches. You can have more of the pre-existing vegetation that's totally intact. In some places will be seriously burned to the ground. And that's all part of the whole diversity dance that allows that site to have more species diversity, because you can have different niches available. These types of trees here provide habitats for different plant or insects and plants and fungi than these types. This much underbrush, provides additional habitat that this doesn't, and so on. This a mosaic of landscape forms is set up by fire, and as a selective force, it brings about different responses that biology has. I'm talking mostly to plants here. It obviously affects animal communities, but most animal communities they'll either run and go away, and if it's the place is no longer suitable for them, they will try to migrate to someplace else. Others will try to hide, dig in, and survive. A lot of the burrowing animals you'll see, like raccoons, obviously squirrels and chipmunks, woodchucks, a lot of denning foxes and cats and so on. The different woody species have different survival techniques and reproductive techniques. One is asexual reproduction. All fire-dependent species will sprout from the stump. If you cut them down, they'll sprout back. If you burn them off, they'll sprout back. Stump sprouts are common in so many different species, some of which aren't very happy with fire, like the lower right here with beech and maple. The tree itself, if a fire goes through, it's very likely to die, versus an oak tree that has a thicker bark it doesn't burn out as much. It doesn't kill it as likely. So what we see here, all these stump sprouts coming from this birch, and whenever you see clumps like this was once upon a time a tree in the center. It was either cut and removed, or it was burned out, and then maybe where you live, this is a 5-year-old birch tree, maybe it's a 20-year-old birch tree. Up in Alaska, that would be about an 80-year-old birch tree up on my homestead. And we can observe this phenomena in the species that live with fire. One of the things, back to the observation and concept, I went to a workshop on trees. A lady was teaching on the spiritual lessons of trees. Well, I feel that trees have a lot of non-material values to convey to us, and so I wanted to go see what her shtick was all about. And we were walking through the woods, and all of a sudden we came upon a clump of trees just like this, and she gasps and she says, "Oh my goodness, everybody stand back! This is a power vortex." And she explained and waved her arms all through the air of how this power vortex caused this phenomenon in the trees. And quite plainly at the bottom, I could see the stump. I didn't want to make her awestruck minions disappointed, but her explanation of this power vortex, if she had a way for all of us to observe this power vortex, that I could give you the instructions of how to observe this power vortex over and over and over and over again, I'd believe her, because it's an observable phenomena. One of the things about this right here is you can go look. There's going to be remains of a stump in here. This is stump sprouts. It's a fire response. Also, root suckers. One of my most unfavorite trees of all, the black locust, has tremendous root suckers. And if you have like hybrid poplars at all that you've used, or even cottonwoods, they'll have these really shallow surface roots, and if you're trampling animals over them or mowing it, you clip them at all, they'll start to sprout up again, and these can be a real royal nuisance. But a perfect fire survival strategy. If a light grassland fire comes through here, those trees, the tops of these little trees, will burn off right to the ground. The prairies actually were difficult to plow, in part because of the dense sod. But if you read the writings of some of the early naturalists, and I'm remembering John Muir specifically, the prairies were really difficult to plow up, not because of the grass roots, but because of what they called grubs. There were these ancient root systems of oaks, for example, and hazelnut, that were growing in the grass, and it was a prairie, a fire go through every year, maybe as infrequently as every 3 to 5 years, it'll stay as a grassland, and you don't realize this little tree grows up, and then a fire comes by, kills the top. The root stayed alive. Tree grows up, the root gets a little bigger. So year after year after year of fires burning off the top. There's never any top to these trees, and the root system is gigantic, and you couldn't get a plow through it. What happened in Wisconsin and a lot of places, all across the Midwest actually, is those areas then were let go, and the forest that was there, just not above ground, boom, sprouted up. It's a fire response. That survival technique, those trees are there, they're going to do all right. So you can see these root suckers coming up. These are on aspen. Some of the largest organisms on the planet are actually aspens that are all the same tree, genetically the same tree, all connected by an underground root system, totally fire-adapted species. One of the responses, or one of the characteristics that's favored by fire is sexual reproduction, especially with trees that have light and wind-blown seed. Willows, cottonwood, aspen, birch, most of the pines. This island right here that I took a picture of in Boundary Waters a couple weeks ago, that island is actually called Burnt Island. Well, Burnt Island, why is it called Burnt Island? It's got 2-foot diameter trees on it, white pines. It also shows evidence of wind throw, that all kinds of trees had snapped through the years, and just the tallest, most sturdy pines that leaned a little bent with the wind remained. This started, I think it was in the 1920s, when that island was burnt, completely burned. Well, this seed floats in on the wind, and it finds some exposed soil, which we'll see later on, and it grows really well with very little competition. One of the things that also happens with fire-tolerant species is they have a higher rate of self-fertilization. The prunuses, for example, cherries, plums, apricots, they can self-pollinate. Same with pines. Pines have a high percentage, so much so that red pine almost doesn't need any pollinator other than itself. Obviously, once it pollinates with itself, there's been a slight genetic change, and so the diversity does kind of increase, the genetic diversity, for a period of time. But most trees, if they have a lot of self-pollination going on, they'll grow a little bit more stunted, not as vigorously as open pollinated with other tree pollen. And it's obvious too that fire, as it goes through, is going to cause a reduction in competing vegetation for fire adapted species. If you are one of these little species here that can survive a fire, your life is far better without all this competition around you. Whereas you're not growing up in a thicket. This is probably a big, huge thicket. There's lots of debris on the ground that was in the way. What I want all of you guys to do as we're going through this exercise is to think about how these different trees and plant communities respond to fire. Well, now, how do they respond to fire? And if this is a response that we want, if we want to have reduced competition for a particular type of vegetation, perhaps a entry into our sites that resembles fire very closely, or maybe fire itself, will create those conditions for us. If we want to have a place that looks like this, how was this created? How can we create this in a very cost-effective, economic manner? And how can we have the vegetation respond this way? We need to understand how these different systems behave with this disturbance, and let's imitate this kind of disturbance if these are the effects we want. I'm not saying that fire in your system is good versus bad, or that you should cut trees down here or not cut trees down there. What I'm saying is that observe the phenomena. What does fire do? It does all these things we've talked about so far. One of the things that it does is, here's another thing about the mixing of soils. What happens is in a lot of fires, especially on sloped ground, you don't have any more surface plants with the fibrous roots holding the surface together, and if a big rain follows, there's all kinds of mudslides afterwards and debris flows. So now what happens if there was an unburned place, unburned area downslope, and all this debris, whether it's dry drifting or wet drifting down the hill, all this new ash and mineral soil moves on top of this layer of organic matter that was the grasses and the other leaves in the system below. We have a mixing again, and we've prepared a seed bed. This is perfectly prepared seed bed for specifically the light windblown seeds that would come in to a burned area. So what it does is it will reduce the organic matter. Fires will reduce the organic matter into its basic constituents and cause nutrients to be available that weren't before. Wood ash is fairly alkaline, so it'll lower the pH, which causes a lot of the decomposer organisms to really kick into high gear. Those of you, especially in the drier areas like Texas and Colorado, California, what's going on in Colorado for sure, and in California with these catastrophic fires that are going on is if anything dies out there, there's so little moisture to do the decomposition that you have all this woody debris that piles up and piles up and piles up. Also happens in the far north, up in Alaska. The decomposition rate, there's enough moisture for decomposition to take place, but it's just slow, and so you get an accumulation of organic matter. Well, if you have plants that need mineral soil to get established, many trees need to have that bare mineral soil. How do you get your seed in contact with the bare mineral soil? Maybe you burn off all that organic matter, temporarily lower the pH, you get some bare mineral soil, you get your little plant established. Now it's got water-soluble nutrients available, less competition. It can really take off and get established really quick and easy. So exposure of the soil is natural. It's a normal kind of disturbance. How do we use this on our site to accomplish what we want? What happens quite frequently with fire adapted species, excuse me, I'm thirsty. Fire adapted species like the pine, like the aspen, like willow, will come into a site that's been disturbed like this. So there's a lot of bare soil exposed. Millions of seeds come in. How do they say in the vernacular? Yeah, a lot of seeds, and they grow really thick, like fur on the back of a cat. One of the things about this is this creates the next fire hazard. Look at the wide spacing in these larger trees. These larger trees were left behind. These are the legacies of this site. Well, there are all these pines that require the fire. Jack pine is a classic. How it depends on fire for its regeneration. So it just cast tons of seed on this bare exposed soil. Now think about what's happening here, and this really relates to a lot of what I talk about with planting a system wherever you live, is if we're going to go plant any kind of woody species on our farm, we need to plant lots of them because we are planting mostly seedlings, because we are intentionally using the process of sexual reproduction to create variation in the offspring. Yeah, we may want to have some clones because they have a predictable crop, size, flavor, ripening period, harvestability, all that kind of stuff for uniformity. But we want and we need genetic variation in the planting because we want to have the abilities to survive no matter what kind of insult nature throws at us. There's going to be species in this picture here that are more disease resistant. They're individuals that would be called varieties. Individuals that are more resistant to fire, that grow faster, straighter, taller. There will be individuals that produce more nuts, seeds, bigger seeds, smaller seeds, and so on. We want to have the total number of plants on site for that genetic variability. And we get to choose, because we're the site developers, we get to choose which ones that we want to keep behind. Well, in a situation like this, all of this fire right now, or all these trees right now, are a serious fire hazard. Next fire comes through, thins it out again. And it thins it out. Maybe this stand right here was burned, 4, 5, 6 times by the time these trees got to be this big. Actually, there was somewhere I was just reading recently that the Boundary Waters itself had a fire period of about 3 to 5 years. Every 3 to 5 years, there would be a fire at any one site. If you just stood there for 5 years, you're going to get a fire within 5 years. Pretty fascinating, I think. Another thing that fire does, in addition to allowing high density pure stands to be planted, when you have these dense stands and fire hasn't come through yet, you now get extra humidity gets built up in there. You have extra sites for insect outbreak, disease outbreak. So fire-created sites favors the establishment of dense, even-age stands like here. Fire goes through, seed goes down. They all were planted at about the same time naturally. So they grow even, they grow fast, same species. They're more susceptible to disease and insect outbreaks. So now you got bark beetles or spruce budworm. Now you've got all of this dead and dry material here. Boom, one little lightning strike or one little Colorado camper, and we know what kind of cigarette butts Colorado campers have, leads to additional fires. And once again, once you burn these trees out, you're going to get a dense stand development of the similar kind of fire-dependent species. And different sites with different moisture regimes will have a different fire period, how frequently the fire comes through. Basically, if you got anywhere that's jack pine, you're going to have a fire within 50 years. You just will. Get over it. Same with lodgepole pine. The ponderosa pine is it actually wants to have fire. It's a fire-dependent species. It's not as flammable as jack pine. Jack pine kind of burns on purpose. We'll talk about some of its survival strategies probably next week. Fires will also...
I'm gonna pause the video for a little bit. I see Wayne is on. Wayne, can you hear us? He's on, but I'm not hearing him. Okay, I'll continue with the video.
Also help to eliminate parasites like mistletoe. So how do we understand what's going on here? We get this dense, uniform, even-aged establishment of this species, pretty much a single species, maybe a couple, 3 at the most. How do we use that? How do we use that as a genetic selector? Then once this happens here, how do we deal with the fact that now we have this big, huge fire hazard? Maybe this is the time to log if we don't want it to burn. If this is our own homestead, maybe we start to thin this out now to make it less fire susceptible in the future, and shred this material, inoculate with mushrooms, etc. How do we understand how these systems are going to work? And if you live in a place like this is just something you're going to have to deal with. Fire is a part of it. Now, eliminating parasites, mistletoe. You may want to eliminate them because you don't have as good tree growth. It's not as straight and as tall. These trees obviously will grow slower than if they had green all the way down. But we also want to think about this. This is actually a very useful product. Anybody who has Christmas and people who kiss each other, you can be selling mistletoe for the holiday season. And actually, I've worked quite a bit with growers in Oklahoma, actually supplying mistletoe to medicinal herb companies. It's used as an anti-cancer compound. I don't exactly know how it's used, but that's used in the herbal cancer apothecary. Fire tends to retain the fire-dependent species on an area. So if you're in an area that is ponderosa pine or jack pine, it'll burn through. The seeds will come down. It's favorable conditions for that species, and the jack pine will regenerate. And then the fire comes through, and the jack pine will regenerate. The southern pines, red pines, white pines, lodgepole pines, oaks of the whole oak savanna region, whether it was California, the whole southwest oak savanna, the front range of the Rockies oak savanna, or the whole midwestern humid oak savannas. The oak is not like the most shade tolerant late successional species. It's a mid successional species, but it was maintained by repeated fires, and of course grazing and browsing was thrown in there as well. That these fire-dependent species in an area where the fire is kept burning at a regular interval or irregular interval, if the case may be, but within a certain fire period. Each different trees will have a different fire period that They want to have fire more frequently than this, but less frequently than that in order for them to regenerate. And all of these different species I just mentioned are different. And if the fire regime changes, the whole successional pathway changes. So like in the Rockies, for example, Engelmann spruce is not very fire tolerant at all. Douglas fir is a little bit more fire tolerant. Ponderosa pine is very fire tolerant, and eventually have these beautiful ponderosa pine savannas with the grasses underneath. Well, if the fire is even more frequent, even these trees will get damaged. There'll be fewer and fewer ponderosas, and it'll eventually turn into a grassland. That's the fire's more frequent. Less frequent, it'll be more Engelmann spruce. Well, then if it goes the other way around, if we decrease the fire frequency, we can shift from total ponderosa pine like here right now, then all of a sudden are less fire or are more fire sensitive. They would burn out. Species will grow up underneath, and then eventually these guys, the ponderosas, won't have anywhere to seed because they need it to be burned and bare soil underneath in order for them to propagate. So then it'll become Douglas fir and eventually Engelmann spruce. So what we end up with all these different disturbances interacting with one another and with fire. Even fire burns 1,000 acres, a square flat 1,000 acres. It will not burn everywhere with the same intensity. So you have a mosaic of different age classes left behind. And this is part of how we carry species forward in time, that if we burned it all uniformly, we don't have that species represented anymore. That actually might, that one particular insect might play an important control role in some of our other plant life cycles that are going on. We can maintain as many of the total species diversity of our area on our site if we have a mosaic of age classes, sizes, physiognomies, shapes, configurations, layouts, etc. This is the way our continent worked for zillions of years before Europeans got here. And I'm going to show this one again. I mentioned it briefly with the ponderosa and Engelmann spruce. Typically, the species that come in the understory are more shade tolerant. They have to be shade tolerant, or otherwise they wouldn't survive in the shade underneath these red pines. These are red pines that are sun-loving. They're a fire-dependent species. If there's a lot of wind throw, they'll get established. Their light seeds will float and land on the mineral soil. They'll get established that way as clumps. But in a large swath, if you get a large stand of red pine, that was a catastrophic fire. Seed blew in. They got established. Well, then underneath, they can't get established in the shade, so it's not red pine that regenerates underneath them. This is mostly balsam fir and eastern hemlock, both of which are extremely susceptible to fire. And so then what happens is these nice tinderbox trees provide the fuel for the fire to come through, clean it out, and keep it dominated as red pine. Or, once again, if these get too big and the fire comes in, climbs right up, and it can torch out the crown, now you've eliminated both species, and you've totally changed succession. So just look at what we have here for opportunities. We have these red pines that are dominating the site. If we want to keep this a red pine dominated site, we can remove the understory. One easy way to remove the understory is through logging, or another way is through burning. Then we have a red pine site with these trees that are going to grow faster and thicker. Maybe we open it up enough so the grass grows in underneath. Now we're grazing cows in a pine silvopasture. That's one option. Another option is just let this go a little bit longer and then remove the red pines. And then we have balsam fir and eastern hemlock and white cedar coming up underneath. And then we manage it as a cedar fir grove. Firs are rather short-lived. They would come out first. Some spruces that were in there. And hemlocks are longer-lived. They could come out spruce maybe second and then hemlock third. So we have a whole different range of successional directions that we can send the site depending on what we choose to do with it. So once again, this site in a natural fire regime, it will tend to stay a fire-dependent site that's colonized by fire-dependent plants will tend to stay that way. A red pine site will tend to be dominated by red pines, white pines, lodgepole pines, etc., because all the understory brush as it grows up will tend to burn off. Now the stand habit the configuration, see the spacing between these, this will determine how that particular stand of trees will be affected by fire. If you have a super high dense stand of trees and you get a fire in that crowns out, that whole section is wasted. That's like the wasted meaning destroyed, not like gone to waste. If you have a species that are intermixed with one another, a fire can come along here and burn through and probably not kill everything. So if you're going to be affecting the ground level beneath trees like this, the stand habit, the spacing, the spatial configuration of them has everything to do with how well they'll survive your disturbance, whether it's grazing or haying or burning. Now, the site conditions. So here we've got all these fire-dependent species here. The site conditions at each site determines which trees are able to reproduce. And like we mentioned here, these red pines here require some kind of wipeout to get rid of these understory trees. They need those understory trees to go away and expose the mineral soil. These trees require plowing if you have it that way. They need bare exposed dirt in order to sprout. If fire comes through frequently, that's going to affect the selection pressure. Infrequently is going to affect the selection pressure. What's going to happen is the species that are most adapted to that site, those characteristics that allowed them to survive that regime propagate within that system. So if you want to get some really fire-resistant oak, for example, go to a place that's like a real dry, sandy area that gets burned frequently. They may reproduce really fast. They grow on really lousy soil, and they may start having acorns when they're really, really tiny. Look to the tougher, more rugged sites for super crazy genetics. Here's a tree that grows and reproduces without any soil growing in the crack in the rocks. Obviously, if you're in a place that looks like this down here on the left, don't try to grow bananas. You know, I wouldn't mind having a tree like that on my farm, this big, huge one. Next week, we're going to talk a lot about individual fire adaptations of different plants, different things that you can look at and recognize. These are adaptive strategies. And then what's kind of really significant for many of us, this is especially North America centric here. We'll talk a little bit about some of the plant communities in North America, specifically the ones that are more fire related, that have a fire history. And so that if you live in the northeast of Lake States, anywhere where there's the western pines, ponderosa, aspen, or if you live down anywhere in the south, mid-south, central south, Douglas fir in the Rocky Mountains or on the west coast, giant sequoia on the west coast, boreal forests in Canada, Alaska, the northern Rockies. If you live anywhere here, understanding how these ecosystems work, how disturbance affects these systems' reproduction is key to your figuring out how to imitate a system like this to produce your own food, fuels, medicines, fiber, and it also will help you to learn adaptive strategies so that if you happen to live in the Front Range of the Colorado Rockies and there's a fire right over the ridge, you might say that, hey, man, I'm all set because I planted my system this way, I have my water management, swales and berms that way. I'm okay. I'm not going to get burned out. Or, hey, I'm looking forward to a fire. I want it to come through instead of having to, be seen in the evening news getting lifted from your roof by a helicopter. Not that that would ever happen. But one of the things now, if we understand the disturbance regime, and like especially next week I'll talk about these systems right here. If we understand the species composition of our region, and if we understand the disturbance regime, we can imitate that in our restoration agriculture system. And I'm going right to this right now because one of the most, what I think is quite a dramatic example of mega large-scale industrial agriculture is actually restoration agriculture. And those are the blueberry barrens. The state of Maine, USA, is actually the world's largest producer of blueberries. They're mostly low-bush blueberries, and they grow in crap like this. This is obviously not high-quality agricultural land. It's stony. Some of it's sandy. some of it's boggy, and it's an extremely fire-dependent system. What would happen on these blueberry barrens here is it gets so hot and so dry certain years that it just torches up, and very few trees survive on it. It's a lot like the heathlands in the UK and whatnot. And so what happens is growers of lowbush blueberries in Maine, they imitate the natural processes, and they intentionally burn their blueberry fields. All different kinds of machinery, they're imitating the effects of fire by actually using fire itself. This is actually, I think, one of the most brilliant agricultural strategies at the industrial scale that humans haven't even realized that they're how ecologically sound this production technology actually is. So we'll start to talk about these different plant communities, their different disturbance regimes, and then how we might imitate those in our own system. And let's just keep in mind the blueberry growers right here, how they're imitating nature and growing blueberries in barrens and burning them. And that's all I have for this evening.
Hey everybody, this is Mark again. So thanks for joining our weekly webinar. Unfortunately, Wayne wasn't here, so Dr. Wayne Durband was supposed to be here because this is Talk with Wayne session. I think Wayne is on. Wayne, can you hear us?
Yeah,
Okay.
I've been having a heck of a time this internet
Okay.
up on my new ranch.
Oh, all right. I'll
So
stop the video.
is Mark done, or did you?
Yeah, we are done.
Okay, let me get my camera up. I want to show you this. It's so beautiful
Okay.
here.
All right.
Are you seeing me? I don't see
Yes.
myself. Oh, okay. I need to flip it.
Yeah. I'll stop the video in a second here. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, I think we
Still showing the video. My camera's not flipping around. It's not doing anything.
okay. I'll show your spotlight for everybody. So
All right, now I can flip it. There we go.
yeah.
So this is my new ranch, everybody. We have closed the deal, and we haven't taken, this is official occupancy. We're here in our last trip before we take over occupancy, but I am at what we call the secondary lodging building and standing out on the deck, and I've got these guys are gonna drive right over my cord, and yet no, they're not. You didn't find him, huh? We I doubt he fell in the water. He's not. I mean, this guy's a pretty darn good fisherman. So yeah, we're online. You're live out on the internet.
Yes. So you're driving that ATV.
Oh
Is it-
no, I'm not in the ATV, Mark. This is Dorian, who's the
Okay.
fellow that we're working with as our partner and our friend and our realtor and all kinds of things. And he's
Oh, wow.
actually
Okay.
looking for Russ, because right over that way is the Salmon River. There's
Yeah.
a boat going down right now with a truck, a truck pulling it. And Russ is out there fishing, and Dorian couldn't find him. So Russ might be hiding, or he's drowned, or something has happened.
Yeah. By the way, that looks beautiful
Yeah,
in the
it's fun.
background. Yeah.
And I think Doug Ness is on here. And,
Yes,
and
he's on.
I talked with Doug, and I'm sure he's still up in Alaska. There, by the way, for anybody that's listening and watching to this, I don't know whether he's filled it yet, but he's looking for somebody to come up there. Maybe you can unmute him, Mark, if he wants to
Okay.
speak. But to potentially go there for from I think the 6th or so of November through early December,
Mhm.
as Marge, his wife, comes back here to Idaho, and that there's basically a caretaker type situation. So,
Yep.
but he's probably filled that by now. But anyway,
Yeah, I put Doug on the microphone, so if he wants to talk, he can.
yeah.
So Doug, can you
Yeah,
hear us?
I can hear
Alright.
you. Hello.
Okay, there you
Hey,
go.
Doug. Hey, man.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it's snowing here right now, but boy,
Well,
it's beautiful.
yeah, this is the pond we have, looking out at sort of a beautiful grassy area. The main lodge is over that way. This is the deck of one of our. This is what we call our secondary lodging building, and there are 3 pretty identical rooms. They're huge, Doug. There, you'll see. I'm going to go inside. I just figured the internet signal. I have a portable Starlink.
Yeah, I think your video froze. Wayne? Yeah, your video is frozen. Okay.
I lost signal for a little bit. I'm back, I think.
Yep, you're back.
Yeah. I think it's real sketchy right now. I haven't figured out. Here's the Starlink modem, and I got to figure out what direction to be pointing it. But there are 3 rooms, pretty much like this one in this lodge. Ooh, excuse me. You hearing me, Mark?
Yep, we can hear you
Oh,
now.
all right. So looking across there is a greenhouse. And then right straight across here is a stable that is going to be converted into a combination of stable and kennel and maybe other uses. That's looking out across the pond to the Salmon River in the background there. And the salmon is also right on the other side of the pond. And like I said, we're missing Ross. We don't know where he is. And Doug mentioned that he had snow up in Alaska. They had snow here up in the higher elevations up on these hills. So where we're standing right here is a little more than 1,800 feet. And those mountaintops there are probably 4,000. So that's 2,000 feet or more higher than where we are. You guys there?
Yes, I'm here. Doug was trying to. I'm not sure if Doug was trying to say something. His audio wasn't clear.
No, I wasn't saying anything, just
Okay.
looks great.
All right.
There's way in the distance. That's Dorian, the guy that was just in below us. He's over there in his laser ATV on the opposite side of the river, looking for us, I think. So I've mentioned this before, but we have a 12-inch pipe going from a stream called Warm Springs Creek, where it's been diverted, and it goes into a concrete diversion area, and then it flows downhill, so all gravity fed, from about maybe a half mile from here over to it ends right down on the other side of the building and goes into the pond, and then also goes to the end over to an irrigation system, which is right behind this little tree that's next to me here. So as you can see, we're just now starting to have our leaves change. In a previous webinar, I mentioned what are called traveling healing trees. And I don't know what they are. I have put the photos that I've taken of them onto the internet and had put into a program called Snapchat and another one called iPlant, and they're not identifying them. The leaves look like elms. We're looking at them right out here in front of me. And supposedly the Native Americans brought them in here and planted them. And we're not sure really what kind of trees they even are. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them right here. I guess
The video froze again. You're frozen again, Wayne.
he found fish out of this pond.
Okay, you are frozen for a few seconds.
I was saying that this pond, which is artificial, is filled by the water coming from that stream I was telling you. That's a mile from here, but it then flows out down at that end and goes into the Salmon River, and steelhead will climb it up that little stream, and they'll come into this pond. So they've caught some big fish out of this pond. So Doug, did you find somebody to be there with you from November 6th on?
Not yet.
Why don't you mention again, what is you're looking for and for how long?
Just for a little over a month, if someone just wants the experience of living in the bush of Alaska, off-grid, 150 miles west of Anchorage, on Lake Clark, in Lake Clark National Park. We're in the park, and just to help out while I'm here and experience a unique lifestyle.
So anybody that is watching this on replay or live, if you'd like to get in touch with Doug and find out about whether that opportunity is still available, just maybe reach out to us and we'll put you in touch with Doug.
Sure.
So when is Marge coming back, Doug? Next 2 weeks from now or so?
Yeah, November 6th. Yeah, I think it's 2 weeks from today or yesterday. Yeah.
Kind of a big day in our country, right?
Yes.
I think that's election day, everybody who's not from the US.
very critical.
So Doug, you can see, and anybody watching this, that across the river from us, not that long ago, there was a fire. So you can see trees up at the top of that ridge that are, have been burned, and it's some not that long ago, frankly. I'm not sure that the timber was that much thicker anywhere here than you'd see. Because it's so dry, it never gets that dense unless it's in a valley where there's springs and water sources. So I think what you're seeing there is pretty typical. The trees that are burned at the top, I mean, they're denser up there. But if I was to go on the other side of this building, I'm afraid I'd lose the internet, so I'm not going to do it just because I don't know yet how this connection is.
Are we looking north?
We are looking straight north there, Doug. Yes. And so this is down the river, and maybe, well, right here would be east. So a little bit northeast. You can see there's a lot more timber, everybody, up on the top of that ridge that I'm looking at to the, almost east, a little bit north. Everybody, Doug makes a good point. The timber will grow oriented to the sun in this part of the world too. And I'm walking down a little bit on the deck here. Maybe you can see that ridge that's to our east that's got a lot. I mean, it's a lot denser timber. These are lodgepole pines that are right around here, like this one right here. By the way, that would make, look how big that tree is, everybody. That would make an amazing amount of lumber. So yeah, you can see back behind here. This was everything you see to the top of that ridge is on our property. And this was burned, I guess, 6 years ago. And obviously didn't get down here. This is a log building, as you can see. I don't know how they chinked this and put it together because you really don't see any of the chinking here. But this is not faux logs. This is really a log situation. Well, I think we've gone past time here, and I'm the one that caused this to happen because I couldn't get on the internet. We had to set this Starlink system up. It's there on my truck. So there's on the very back, you can see my truck there, and there's what's called an alpha tent on the top of it. And you're not seeing the satellite dish. It's behind that right now, but that's where it is. And again, we're in a canyon, everybody. This is, like I said, those are 2,000 feet higher than us, and the summit of that over there, that's not more than a mile as the crow flies from where we are. I don't think it's that far even. It's a lot farther than that if you hiked it, but it's probably close to around a mile. But so we're in a steep canyon. So Dorian's coming back with the ATV. Let's hope he's got Russ with him. I hope Russ didn't fall in the river and drown.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's going to be a good one for us. Mark Shepard probably gave a great talk today. What number was that in his series, Mark?
It was number 10.
Okay.
Yep. And he was talking about fire also.
I saw that. I saw a combine or
Right.
something. It was.
Fire
So yeah, I was able
disturbance.
to watch a little bit of it. Well, I'm going to run. It looks like these guys, I think the two of them are in that ATV. So we're going to, well, no, I
Yeah,
only see one. Russ is not with him. This
Uh-oh.
is weird. I think I got to go help look for Russ, guys. So
Okay. Have a
appreciate
good
all
one,
you
Wayne.
guys. Love you. We'll talk to you later. I'm going to go find Russ.
Thank you.
Talk
Have
to
a
you
good
later.
day.